So, welcome. Let's get us going. Thank you for joining us on this captivating journey into the world of conspiracy theories. To kick things off, let's briefly discuss their history and how they connect to our core human nature. Now, so these conspiracy theories have been around for ages, stemming from our innate ability to detect patterns and make connections. Now, while this cognitive skill helps us survive, it can also lead to false connections fueling conspiracy theories. And I'm simplifying things for our guest speaker here. In ancient times, people explained events through stories, attributing them to the gods or powerful forces. But then as societies grew more complex, so did the conspiracy theories. The rise of mass communications in the 19th and 20th centuries have led to an explosion of theories reflecting the anxieties and the uncertainties of the times. Now, in the digital age, conspiracy theories spread so fast, rapidly online, with social media algorithms amplifying them. Our brains, wired for pattern recognition, can easily be drawn into these webs of intrigue. Now, as we chat with our distinguished guest, Natasha Todorovic, we're going to explore the human elements and brain functions behind these conspiracy theories. We'll also discuss strategies for fostering more collaborative, trusting, and meaningful conversations in this complex, globalizing, digitally leveraged world, especially as we start to look at the ways in which AI is now available to all of us. So stay tuned as we unravel the mystery of conspiracy theories and their grip on our collective imagination. So now I'm delighted to introduce our remarkable guest, Natasha Todorovic-Cowan, a true expert in her field. Natasha supports leaders and their teams in navigating change, resolving cultural conflicts, and overcoming dysfunction from the C-suite to the shop floor. With over 25 years of experience and rooted in 70 years of research, Natasha is the world's leading expert in applying spiral dynamics, tools, and programs to address the root causes of people problems. Anybody have any of those? In organizations. Her work spans 5 continents, helping leaders, teams, and organizations achieve their vision. Welcome, Natasha. It's truly an honor to have you here.
Karen, I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much. I am excited about the topic and exploring the idea of conspiracy and what makes conspiracy with you. We shall conspire together.
Shall we conspire a little on our own? So, as Natasha, as someone who's spent years looking at the intricacies, and I kind of go to the head of human thought and its relationship to teamwork and productivity. Now, we'll get to those, but spiral dynamics seems to be both captivating as an idea and effective for people wanting to take into consideration the human element and to put it to work for them rather than against them. And it seems like that's part of why we want to understand this, and especially in our complex and volatile reality today. Can you walk us through how this framework in particular sheds light on the mindset of conspiracy theorists and their decision-making processes, especially in today's, digitally fueled society and information access that we all have so massive amounts of?
Well, Karen, is a really great question. And it's not like I went and studied conspiracy theorists and, took out an ad and went, all conspiracy theorists come over here, because most conspiracy theorists don't identify themselves as such, right? But I had the gift of working in 15 different countries. We've had clients from over 50 working with our assessments and our tools. And with those tools, what we got to do is we got to measure how people were processing their leadership approach, the way they preferred to be led, the way they preferred to learn, how they saw the world, how they organized, which gives us this insight into how people connect together and form teams and groups. And a conspiracy really is this idea that there are some powerful others who have gathered together and they're doing bad things, to dominate the world, or, whatever the motive is. And what I found interesting is how in a lot of our programs, it's not everyone, but people would come up and, they just confide in you as the program leader. And then they'd start to tell you stories about the things they believe. Now, I've got a multi-part model that I'm happy to share, and I've got some slides for you. But a number of stories kind of started sticking in my head. And because our approach isn't focused at the content, it's focused on how people hold contents, how they hold ideas, how they hold their beliefs. It started me kind of tracking, as we are pattern and meaning making people, right? It started me tracking what was going on for these people. And that's what I'm excited to be talking with you about today.
So there were three words that you just said. Well, you said a lot, but that just jumped out at me. And so I suspect you'll tease each of these out. But the idea of powerful others, and it sounded like that was where the person who made those comments would be, or the people in general, us, see where the power is, i.e. outside of ourselves.
Not me, not there.
Yeah. And then there's the story component. And then there was the interesting thing that I heard you just say is how people hold that information or that story. So tell me more.
So I love how you just grab those elements and put them together, because that's at the root of the model that I'd like to share with you today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then just walk you through. And every consultant uses an iceberg, right? So that's nothing new. But the iceberg really is to show us there's stuff at the surface that we can see, and then there's stuff below the surface. The more at the top, the more visible. The lower down, the more invisible. The more at the surface, the easier to change. The deeper it is, the harder it is to change. So the anatomy of conspiracy lies in a few key components. And one is the content, that's at the surface. And that's this is what I believe. And we'll get into that in a moment. Then it happens in the connection area, how people are relating to themselves, to others around them. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then, we've got our spiral dynamics colors. I'll unpack a couple for you. And then we've got the two really important components, which is the world that people are living in and how they cope with that world. So you've captured it in the way you were listening to my descriptions. And it's the way we teach our students and clients to process so they can see what's going on under the surface. So I remember one absolutely amazing woman. She was an artist. And when after 9/11, when we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and then we engaged in war, it was very unpopular at the time, right at the beginning, to be against these wars. Right. It was probably in the US, about 10% of the population was against them. And so Nancy was one of these people who stood against these invasions and these militaristic attacks. And she just began with the belief that it was wrong. That's not how we deal with what should have been a police action. And she teamed up with the Veterans for Peace. There were weekly protests down the streets of Santa Barbara protesting this war. And what we started to see as she was engaging in the protests was this very, out of a peace-driven values, that this war was wrong. But what started to emerge over time, and I'll just lay out this little model for you, that a core belief, the one that sits at the center of action, is surrounded by supporting beliefs, beliefs that make that core belief exist, that give it fuel, that give it food, that give it life.
Yeah.
So that's where we're sitting with contents. And so as Nancy over time was protesting, what I noticed, and they went year after year after year after year, even when all the other protests had stopped, there's a small group that continued. And as they continued, what I started to see was she was not talking about the war anymore. She was talking about contrails. She was talking about the other building. She was talking about the relationship of our government with the Saudis, right? And things started to get, have these tones of, conspiracy. And when you talk to her about, well, the science doesn't support the contrail thing, she just completely rejected the science. She completely rejected any pushback, and she kept doubling down on these beliefs.
Right.
And part of what we realized was the beliefs became identity.
Right. It sinks deep enough into the sense of self that it becomes identity, and therefore an attack on the belief equals an attack
on the person,
me, which causes an immediate emotional response.
Yes. And she would not have said this is a belief, right? She would have said these are facts, these are truths, this is what's going on in the world, and people need to open their eyes to it.
Yeah.
And belief is what you said earlier, the patterns that we fill in between knowns.
So, I mean, in some way, in that sense, it sounds like we are wired for, conspiracies just being, in a sense, understandable but erroneous connections.
Well, the beginning,
which then become habituated in some way.
Yeah. Well,
and then we use them so much that we identify with them. Excuse my simplification of something probably.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. Look, we all believed in like the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, right? We had these beliefs, but at some point we grew up, we thought about it, we got deeper in terms of the way we were examining these things. We grew up, somebody told us it didn't exist. We went through a process. But just because we have a belief that we hold strongly doesn't mean that we are conspiracy theorists, because a lot of people hold beliefs strongly, and they're not beliefs in these, evil, powerful people coming together to control the world, right? So
would you say that then, in a way, that conspiracies are just kind of one type of belief system that humans end up holding? And sometimes all of the things align and are appropriate, but somewhere up in that decision tree, of maturation and things like that, we start to prefer to hold on to pre-existing beliefs rather than figure out why some of the incoming information, the facts we're seeing or hearing, may be exposing a weakness. And so we get defensive rather than curious or something like that.
Yes, this is one ingredient.
Yeah.
We can't understand the conspiracy theorist mindset just by looking at the beliefs.
Right.
That's the content.
Yeah.
Right. We've got to look at the container. What allows these beliefs to be poured into this container? What allows them to fit this container? What attracts them to the container in the first place?
So what does allow that? What?
More things, Karen. Let's do this one. So the next piece, right, is the connection piece. And I know you talk about this a lot. I know this is very core to a lot of the work you do, but connection in terms of emotion, social interaction, the invisible in between that happens in communication between people. So that's under the surface. And what I found in my work and the work that I've done with coaches and consultants and business leaders around the world is that we are not as aware of what's going on internally as we believe we are. So one of my clients worked for the government, and what really surprised me was he started talking about these conspiracies in the government. And when I pressed him a little bit further, what became apparent outside of the content, outside of the beliefs, was he wasn't getting the promotions he needed. What he started to say was, I want these promotions. I'm really qualified. He had this belief in himself, but his higher ups rejected him. His higher ups tried to tell him what he needed to improve on, but he just didn't get what was going on relationally. He didn't see how he was showing up, and he didn't take ownership of that, and he didn't adjust how he needed to. So he was excluded. He was denied promotion. They didn't see him use information wisely and effectively. So they withheld because they didn't find him able to handle the job. In his mind, he was great. He was wonderful. He deserved those promotions. So that exclusion, those feelings of anger, frustration, being put on the outside where he was supposed to be put on the inside, caused these beliefs that something bigger, badder, more sinister was going on.
So part of where, tracing that back, you said part of what's going on is it's actually kind of like an incorrect self-assessment, that we sometimes believe that we're better than we think than we are, at least in others' eyes, even if, maybe is really good, but at least in the other's eyes, this person was not being as self-aware, not adapting when to their prompts and recommendations. He was unresponsive, and so that makes him untrustworthy. To them.
That made him untrustworthy to his superiors, but his experience was one of alienation.
Sure. And so
yes. So that
my question in there is, is there then, just say to some extent, we probably all misassess ourselves at some level.
Yeah.
Clearly some more than others. Is that cultivated through self-awareness, mindfulness? A lot of these things, they're studied by Harvard professors and others, whatever. But is there an antidote to that? What is it that we can do to minimize or to, create that congruence between our self-concept and kind of actually where we are. I don't know whether that's pertinent to spiral dynamics, but
it is.
okay.
It absolutely is. The personal and professional development. 30 years ago when I started in the world of personal and professional development, it was weird. It was strange, right? Now it's common. And through, not only spiral dynamics assessments, there are all kinds of assessments. There's some great psychometrics that enable us to understand ourselves and our patterns a lot better. And it's one thing to have the information. It's another thing to just be willing to sit back and go, okay, let me absorb this. Let me absorb what this means. Let me engage with others in conversation, not so that I am wrong, right? Because in this particular interaction, he was wronged. He was seen as being wrong. He didn't want to be wrong. He wanted to be in. He wanted his talents appreciated. He wanted his skills to be used. And every rejection, as they kept pushing, pushed him further and further into this belief in the conspiracy, because he refused to look at himself and he refused to be accountable. And he was in a spiral dynamics program. Does it work all the time? No. Does it work a lot of the time? More than 50%? We've seen amazing breakthroughs as people would sit with a self-awareness that they didn't have previously and commit to engaging differently with people that they cared about and in their lives.
So then part of what, just in terms of understanding the spiral dynamics, then it actually, that awareness is one of the initial first steps of, getting more feedback on. It's like looking in the mirror. Oops, my hair is out of place. Okay, now it's not quite the way I want it to be. I got to work on that. So an assessment in that way is a self-reflection that helps us make take a next decision. And so in those cases, or in the cases of conspiracy theorists versus healthier, even if not perfect, I don't know a perfect human being.
There is no such thing as perfect. And in the conspiracy theorist mindset, there is, and people are failing to reach the perfect ideal of what they judge government should be, higher ups should be, leadership should be.
So are you saying then that one of the kind of an underlying problematic perspective on things is that it's either or, rather than seeing things as different and making a choice about difference? I don't know whether that's, maybe you could reframe that somehow, but it seems like it's something.
I am heading exactly in that direction, Karen. You are right on. Look, one of the things that's happening is a collapse in belief in government, a collapse in belief in the system that used to work.
We don't know what to believe, right?
A collapse in trust and faith in authority that now has feet of clay, whereas it used to be perfect. Right? And that's also what's happening. So in this process of adapting to our world and getting to know self, the self is evolving. And what's so threatening is when I have a self-identity that is rock solid, and now I need to look at myself differently and change and adapt.
I mean, it's almost like we don't want to look in that mirror.
A lot of us don't. And look, come on, it's hard, right? I mean, it means change. What does change mean? Change means, on the most part, something bad is going to happen to me, because every time change happened,
It's difficult.
Was painful.
It's difficult. It's painful. It's confusing. I'm uncertain. All of the things we don't like feeling. I mean, which is what,
Therefore,
yeah.
we make up stories about what this is about.
Mm. It's so the stories are kind of like a self-justification at the personal level. I mean,
Well, they are.
for
And
not
it's,
changing. I mean,
yeah,
that's what, a reason not to change.
and it's making sense of why are we experiencing this fear? If I have fear, it must be true. It is a
Mm.
truth about myself and the reality of the world. If I
Right.
am angry, then it is a truth about the
Mhm.
injustice that's happening out there, right? And me being wrong, well, if I feel fear this strongly and I feel anger this strongly and I'm powerless to change it, then something must be going on out there. And that takes us to what we're talking about, which is our colors, right? And that's what the magic is in spiral dynamics, right? So let's take, blue. Where's our blue? Kind of there, right? So blue, what does it mean, right? Well, in our blue, we are attuned to rank, status, prestige, institutional
Mm.
power, right? So in our blue, I trust authority. I trust my institution. I trust our processes.
Mhm.
Now, very different when we get to our orange is I'm empowered to change. My job is to change things, to change the world.
Mm.
And sometimes I have an exaggerated sense of my own power to make that change happen, right? Another one is, where is causality? Well, causality in blue is external. It happens out
Mhm.
there. They did it to me, right? Causality in orange is internal. I'm in charge. I make things happen. I'm empowered to make a shift, right? So in our, then I've got another couple. So the orientation in our blue is there are
Mhm.
standards, there's authority, there's the way things need to be done,
Right.
and I follow the letter of the law. And the orientation in orange is I'm free, I'm independent, I get to choose, I'm smart enough to do the right thing, don't tell me what to do. And what I noticed was after talking to conspiracy theorist after conspiracy theorist after conspiracy theorist was something interesting, because these systems aren't just, most people think of them as types. You are a
Right.
blue, you are an orange. And
Yeah. I mean, sorry.
yeah, so what I loved about one of our conversations was when you said, how did you say it? We make things out of things,
Mhm.
right? The thinging effect, right? So we're taking these flowing
Mhm.
systems that we really need to think of, like in these terms. I'm just going to grab my pen. So in the terms of a flow, right? There's an entering phase. Then there's this nodal phase, and that's
Mhm.
when we have this particular color. Then there is this exiting phase. And as we are exiting, the new system is going through an entry. And that is changing identity. And this need for certainty here, as we start to have a world that changes, a
Right.
world that gets more complex, that need for certainty as they're going through this exiting, entering phase, our conspiracy theorists, and it's not saying everyone in this transition from blue to orange gets
It creates an environment that's more likely to have that kind of situation.
yes.
Yeah.
So in this transition, people can get stuck. What is common for the majority of conspiracy theorists that I have met is that they are stuck in this transition. It doesn't mean this transition produces conspiracy theorists. We've already seen how, for Jackson, that external authority started to fall apart, right? For Nancy,
Right.
world for her started falling apart. She couldn't pay for her health care. She didn't understand why they couldn't stop this terrible thing that was so wrong. She always would team up with the veterans. Her art was rejected. She was rejected. And she made it a mission to stop this war, and it didn't stop. And she experienced complete and utter failure as a human being for not being able to stop it. And then she couldn't explain it. And the way she explained it, the way it made sense for her, was that it was a conspiracy, that these were the forces, that these were the intentions. One of the people, Dawn, on one of our programs, kept, and I think we talked about this one, that the conspiracy theory around the UN trying to take over the world, right? And as we were going through the material in spiral dynamics, it's kind of complicated and it's complex. We're talking about the systems of humans as they grow and as they change and as they create systems.
And it seems to me that this transition, this process is taking place in many aspects of our lives. So, it's easier to think of like when we were a child, our relationships are primarily, child and parent, authority figure, the God of my life is my parent, does everything. And then as you grow, then there's that transition to the independence of adulthood, which goes through its transitions. But that's an area of relationships. But then, maybe you step into a class where you want to get good at something, and then your teacher is in the authority position. So even though maybe you're now an adult, not having an authority relationship with your parents, now you're still in that kind of a dynamic with somebody else. And so we're constantly going through these kinds of relationship, this kind of dynamic in many different relationships. And it seems like today, with the pace of life and change increasing, then we've got more of we're probably going to be in more of this blue-orange space for a lot more aspects of our lives. And that can challenge anybody's tolerance levels to handle that kind of thing. Is that a facet of what's going on too?
Yeah, I love how you put it. So we have, as children, been primed to look up to some kind of an authority.
It's just natural.
And we oscillate. We oscillate from that external locus of control to an internal locus, right? Terrible twos. I want to do it on my own, mommy, right?
Yeah.
I
give
do
me
it
food.
Yeah. So we oscillate, and then we do the same thing as we develop as adults. And the oscillation is from, an I, freedom and independence, to a we, collaborating, connecting. And there are different variations of that. And that's the warm and cool in the spiral. And it's not just, the focus on them or the focus on I, there are gradations in between.
Right.
And we get caught in those mixes and blends sometimes.
So how does this understanding, potentially help us to engage more effectively and cultivate richer, more insightful conversations and relationships?
Well, I'll tell you, does it work for everyone? No, right? We're talking about some of the people that frustrate us, right? And when you've got an aunt or an uncle or a mother or a father or a sister or brother or cousin who's gone down the conspiracy rabbit hole, it can be really frustrating. And one of my clients talked about how her uncle had gone down that rabbit hole and nobody in the family talks to him because he can't stop talking about it. Like there's a compulsion in
Right.
it. And so my client, Dawn, what I realized as we went along trying to explain the complexities of human systems and how they evolve and change, there was a point where he understood things. And then as it started getting more and more complex, he just couldn't go there. And he struggled with it. He struggled with it. And for a majority, meaning more than half, when we start going through these developmental phases and how they evolve and what they mean and the research, we in general start to see people with a more thoughtful, more nuanced approach. That happens with the majority. And some of it is teaching, some of it is willingness to absorb, some of it is grappling with these ideas and concepts. That's why we educate ourselves and take different programs. But for Dawn, no matter what we did in trying to introduce the material and different people and a variety of models to help him understand and activities and exercises, it was very clear that the complexity was beyond him. And it's not that he wasn't a good person, and it's not that he wasn't smart, and it's not that, there was a flaw. We all have things that we're good at, and we all have things that we can grok and absorb. And we all have things that we're not great at. And that's why we need multiples of talented people to come together to work together effectively. A conspiracy, right? People need to come together in the complexity of our world as we have it today and work together on our thorniest problems. And when they work together, and there isn't clear communication or the things are difficult to understand, that in and of itself creates fodder for conspiracy.
So one of the things that's always seems like it's heartbreaking is that when people get involved in some of the conspiracies, it's almost, this is just a funny way of putting it, but people become so enamored of the conspiracy theory that they're even prepared to sacrifice their most important relationships.
Yes.
Almost as if their love of that conspiracy, and I'm personifying whatever else, love of that conspiracy theory is greater than their love of, the ones.
And they go join ISIS.
Okay, yeah. And sometimes they go join ISIS, yeah. And so stepping back before that moment where maybe there is a step too far in those types of situations, but it seems like sometimes people do come back. People can cross back over again into sane land, so to speak. Easy for me to say sane land where I live.
My world is always sane.
Yes,
It's that.
Of course I'm sane. Even if nobody else is. But what are some of the things that we can do about this? That even if we might see it in a friend or a relative, or are there things that we can do? What is it? What kind of environments can we create that give us all a chance to work together better, so we can figure things out together rather than hunker down and
go join ISIS?
and go join it. Yeah. So not join ISIS. Other than that.
Yeah. I think some of it just comes from being willing to discuss beliefs and not making people wrong for their beliefs.
To feel,
And
have that empathetic engagement so that people don't feel threatened for having it, don't feel threatened because of having their belief.
yeah, when they're rejected personally,
Yeah.
then they're going to go down the crazy rabbit hole, because they're going to find fewer and fewer people who believe the same thing that they do. Then
Social media's role in all of this. What do you see, you know, because people use it all the time. People go onto TikTok and Twitter, or used to go on Twitter, whatever, wherever they go, or Facebook or Instagram, or wherever they go.
Yeah, what one of my clients just came back from New Zealand, and he was describing his experiences being in a bubble, because he had this wonderful sort of meditation retreat, and he called it a bubble. And then he came back and he said, you know, my life and my work with this organization, I'm realizing I'm still in a bubble, right? So we're all in these bubbles. And what social media does is it reinforces the bubble that we want to be in. And it
The echo
does
chamber, the bubble, the whatever we call, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we need to do, and we need to cultivate it consciously, is to hang out with people that we disagree with, and hang out with people that we normally might not, and get to see their perspectives. You know, there's a group I hang out with, and they keep talking about having litter boxes in schools, right? You know, not a thing, right? But they believe it deeply. There's no way that I'm going to talk them out of it, but it doesn't mean that we can't connect around other things. And that as long as I don't make myself separate and an enemy, because the minute you do that, then they'll go down that road.
There's no conversation at all. I'm realizing, at least in my thinking, I'm connecting this back to something that I almost earlier before you showed some more of your explanation and understanding of spiral dynamics. What hit me was that essentially what you seem to be describing is that we don't do well, and that's probably the bigger we don't do well with our emotions when we tend to see them as absolute in and of themselves, that if we feel fear, there absolutely must be something, rather than seeing it, well, our brain's wired to see fear in those types of situations. Let's wait a few seconds while all of those chemicals kind of finish their flush and allow me to then go past that and see something else. So there seems to be an absolutism and a fear. Oh, that's another emotion. Anyway, of our emotions, but part of it is you know, we're trained to think, we're trained to be analytical, but we're not schooled in dealing with our emotions, even describing them, understanding them, valuing them, not as something evil or bad or not to be brought into the room, as if we could do that. So it seems like that is that a kind of like almost a good entry point for addressing some of these things, that having better ways to deal with our emotions and feel heard and I don't know.
I absolutely agree with you. We are not schooled in it. And what we do when we hear somebody that we care about and that we love going down, let's call it the conspiracy rabbit hole, we get scared. And our fear and our anger and our reactions very well might tend to push them away.
Right.
One of my friend, colleague, client, you know, kind of mix, had this whole conspiracy theory around the world of pharmaceuticals and the world of medicine. And when he got really, really sick, he refused to see a doctor. And his fear and anger and suspicion, people would just nod and smile and just kind of, they're there, right? Which reinforced it.
Right.
He wasn't taking the approach of, okay, I'm afraid. Let me tune into this fear and understand what it's trying to tell me about me. The
Mm.
fear was the truth about the reality of the terrible world out there. Not to say that there aren't terrible things going on,
Mhm.
right? But the way he'd matched it up literally got in the way of him pursuing health. And he eventually died because he refused to
Wow.
see
Yeah.
professionals.
Right. So in this, it seems that it would behoove us. I mean, even when before, also when you were talking about change and how, we don't like the discomfort of it, and yet, going and being in a place where we are with people, talking with people with ideas and positions and life experiences that are so dramatically different to ours. Is actually a healthy situation. Maybe that's why travel is good. You can't help but end up in places where you didn't plan on going. But I guess I'm looking to, hear from you. What would be just, if somebody who perhaps is not in the corporate world, not in the change management world, what would be some takeaways of things that a person can do to strengthen, our own and our own families' capacity to relate? Well, putting it very
Yeah,
simply.
I think having honoring, thoughtful, respectful conversations around, just because it's in our heads, is it true? And
Mm,
playing the game of what if this wasn't true,
mm.
right?
What,
You can do
what would
that.
it do to me?
What would happen if this wasn't
Yeah,
true? It's a fun game, right? What would
yeah,
happen if this was true instead? And then
yeah,
it gives us that sort of flexibility and creativity of mind.
yeah,
Then the other piece is recognizing and acknowledging feelings. We live in an affect phobic society. We have been
yep.
taught to shut down on our feelings, to ignore our feelings, that not to show our weaknesses through feelings.
Right.
And that causes so many crazy things that happen between people that we're not even noticing.
Right, right.
If we can get to the place where we are accepting our feelings as they are, recognizing them, and knowing that it says something about us, maybe
Mm,
about the world out there, maybe about the other person, but just because there are words in our head and there are feelings in our
mm,
bodies, it is not truth.
mm.
And
Right, right.
what I do is I'll sit and go, okay, what am I feeling? And when you get good at it, it literally takes a split second. What am I
Right,
feeling
right,
now?
right.
Okay, I'm feeling whatever the feeling is, happy, sad, excited, hurt, angry. What is it telling me about me and my needs right now? Right? Listen to that message. And then the next question is, what do I do to get this need met in a way that honors me as I am? And you stop making the feelings about the world out there. Because
So,
if you test how many times you were right, we tend to look for the times we're right.
yeah.
But if we really look for the number of times that we are also wrong, we learn from that as
Mhm.
well. And that invites us to get curious and explore with others rather than, as you said earlier, shut down,
Mhm.
lock onto this is the truth of my identity, nothing else is true. And if you don't agree with me, well, then you are wrong. And then we get into this assimilation contrast effect, which is I assimilate those who agree with me. I
Right.
contrast and make war against those who disagree with me. And then it's us versus them. And I just double down on my bubble.
Just as you were saying that last point, it took me way back to when I went to school. I grew up on a farm. So when I went to school, all of a sudden, I was with lots of kids. And I still remember learning the game Cold War. And in Australia, in the playground, elementary school playground, the game of war was you pick up a stick and you draw a line in the sand. and you don't cross the line. And I thought, now, is that ever a stupid game? But so it's, but we draw lines.
We draw lines with our feelings. We draw lines with the words in our heads. The words in our heads take us to beliefs. We draw lines with those beliefs. We draw lines around who is us and who is them. And we can soften those lines and we can eliminate those lines in pursuit of understanding.
We are getting close to the end of our time. I know just in the last little bit that you've been talking, that I just want to read out the couple of things that I wrote down as self-awareness. I mean, that, but even there, how do you become self-aware? How do you sit down and say, I'm aware of myself? Anyway, just as a practice to have that mindfulness, awareness of what's going on inside as well as what's going on outside.
Yes,
we talk to ourselves all day.
Yeah, self-awareness. You can just pause and listen to the words in your head. You can pause and feel the feeling and talk to the feeling and ask the feeling what it's trying to tell you. That grows self-awareness. Just those two simple things. I mean, there are a lot more, but those two simple things.
We have to
someone reflect to you what you're hearing and feeling and saying. Also grows it. That's what great friends are for.
And I thought one of the things that would be really good new board game would be about, one that would help build emotional vocabulary, and that would maybe, I don't know, anyway, it just occurred to me that we have board games for strategy and for winning and for, who can out strategize somebody else or outplay, but maybe there needs to be, a board game. I don't know whether you've got one anywhere in your.
Well, actually, a friend of mine has cards for playing cards for emotions. So they exist. These things
they exist. Yeah, maybe they do. So anyway, that would be then something to play with, as just because I think part of it is we learn well. Like children, when you can play with something and get introduced to something in a very non-threatening way, then you're more likely to, test it out, try it out, whatever. So an phobic society, that was another phrase that I loved of yours, because we do seem to be, and the questioning of, is it true? And because that's a willingness to really look, that takes courage. That can even strengthen perhaps the courage in us to be wrong, to be more thoughtful, to inquire differently, so that we can actually embrace the world in a different way. That makes us bigger, bolder, stronger.
Absolutely. And that also has some, it also leans into our social networks. Do our social networks support us as we're changing? Do they still love us as change happens?
And looking for communities of people that can support that process. I mean, you can go to another community for other kinds of support, but even finding communities that are, supportive of that type of growth and development.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, people like you and I facilitate programs making those spaces available, because what we're doing is we are constructing thoughtfully and intentionally a space where that's possible so that growth can happen.
So with that, and as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you in a second, if you've got anything else, but I know that on the exceptional.tv page and on Natasha's page, she's got available a resource, access to a resource. And I probably should have put up, I don't know whether I can put up quickly make a QR code for people to grab. So if there's any closing comments that you would like to make, Natasha, about that, give me a moment and I'll see if I can throw up that QR code.
So I think the idea of conspiracy theory can be overly simplified and overly generalized. And we did two examples of that. We did the example where conspiracy is a group of people just concocting something. And we do that all the time. The difference is it illegal? That starts to give it nuance. And then we took it into conspiracy theory being powerful others are doing nefarious things. They get away with it because they've got that power, and there's some kind of intent to control the world. And the presupposition is there's a lack of factual evidence around it, and that it's bolstered by fear, by anxiety, by an inability to explain through logical means why this is happening. And that comes from living in a world that, frankly, is more complex than most of us can handle. So we are pushing the boundaries of our ability to handle complexity. And having conspiracy theory come up in that battle is a normal thing.
And I would have to say that as we are now, launching newly in this 2023 into a world where assimilating AI into business practices in ways that we have not done before, it seems to me we've got a whole nother level of interesting things going on. So I hope this was just, I quickly dropped in this QR code so that people can quickly go on and grab the resources that you provided, Natasha. Thank you so much. And again, people can go back to exceptionaltv.tv, exceptionaltv.com, and find Natasha's page there to get more information about Natasha. And this link, if you don't get that somewhere else, if you don't capture it now, but it'll be there more permanently on the video online. But I want to thank you, Natasha, so much for taking the time. I think this is in the context of something that's of great curiosity to many people about conspiracy theories. You were able to introduce many ideas and really important bits and pieces about who we are as human beings and our social selves that increasingly become important in our tech-heavy world. As a lot of tech takes over a lot of stuff, that will not ever take away the human side that is so important. And it if anything, it highlights in bold and underlines the importance of our relationships and our ability to communicate and accept who we are as human beings, with all of that, with all of the parts of us. Thank you so much, Natasha. It's really been fun. And I guess that's it from Exceptional TV. And thank you, Natasha. And
it's been a treat, a delight, and a pleasure. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again.